This is why the American South has become absolutely essential to the United States economy, security, and future. 13 southern states now generate nearly $9 trillion in GDP, which represents roughly 30% of the entire nation's output, while producing almost half of America's energy, hosting its largest military installations, and attracting more businesses and people than any other region in the country. Back in 1938, President Franklin Roosevelt declared the South the nation's #1 economic problem. But today, that same region drives American prosperity like no other part of the country. What changed between then and now explains why America needs the South more than at any point in history. Understanding the South's importance starts at the very beginning, when Virginia didn't just participate in founding America, but essentially ran the country for its first few decades. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and James Monroe all came from Virginia, and together they held the presidency for 32 of the nation's first 36 years under the Constitution. 8 presidents total have come from Virginia, more than any other state in American history, and that dominance wasn't accidental. When James Madison arrived at the 1787 Constitutional Convention, he brought the Virginia Plan with him, and that document became the structural blueprint for the federal government Americans still use today. Political power flowed from Virginia, but so did economic strength that made the entire colonial enterprise possible. Virginia's tobacco trade generated more revenue for England than any other colony through a 2 shilling per hogshead export tax that started in 1613. South Carolina turned rice into the 3rd most valuable British American export after tobacco and grain, while indigo became the colony's 2nd most valuable export from the 1740s through the 1790s. Cotton transformed everything by 1860. American cotton represented 2/3 of global supply and made up more than half of all U.S. exports, with cotton cargo passing through New Orleans alone valued at $220 million annually, equivalent to over $7 billion in today's money. When Senator James Hammond declared, "Cotton is king," in 1858, he was describing economic reality rather than making a political statement, because the South's agricultural output had become indispensable to both American and European economies. Between Roosevelt's 1938 declaration and today's economic dominance sits one of the most dramatic regional transformations in American history. 3 major changes made the difference, and the first one might seem basic, but without it, nothing else could have happened. Rural electrification through the Tennessee Valley Authority changed the fundamental equation. Fewer than 10% of rural homes in the South had electricity when the TVA was created in 1933, which meant no industry would locate there and no modern economy could develop. 16 hydroelectric dams went up between 1933 and 1944, and today the TVA serves as the nation's largest publicly owned power provider, reaching 10 million people across 7 states. Air conditioning comes second, and this single technology unlocked the South's potential in ways people outside the region rarely appreciate. Year-round industrial production became possible once factories could maintain comfortable temperatures, and migrants from colder regions suddenly found Southern living attractive instead of punishing. 18% of Southern homes had AC in 1960, 73% had it by 1980, and 97% by 2015, which made the 1960s the first decade since the Civil War where the South gained population instead of bleeding people to the North and West. Right-to-work laws following the 1947 Taft-Hartley Act pulled manufacturing away from unionized Northern industries. And that advantage persists today, with all 13 core Southern states maintaining right-to-work status. Companies making relocation decisions put that factor near the top of their lists every time. 70% of all American economic growth since 1960 has occurred in the South and West. Texas experienced 170% population growth between 1950 and 2000, while Florida went from 2.8 million residents to 18.8 million between 1950 and 2010. What Roosevelt called America's biggest problem had become its growth engine: $8.7 trillion. That's the combined GDP of 13 southern states today, representing roughly 30% of national output, and the individual state numbers reveal just how concentrated economic power has become. Texas leads with a GDP of $2.7 trillion, making it the second largest state economy in America and the 8th largest economy in the entire world, if you counted it as an independent country. Florida generates $1.7 trillion and ranks 4th nationally. Georgia hits $888 billion. North Carolina reaches $745 billion. Virginia contributes $688 billion. And the Southeast region's $6.5 trillion GDP makes it the largest U.S. region by economic output. Corporate headquarters tell the same story. Texas hosts 52 to 54 Fortune 500 companies, including ExxonMobil at number 8 with $349.6 billion in revenue, plus McKesson and AT&T among the top 50. Houston ranks second nationally with 24 to 26 headquarters, while Dallas-Fort Worth comes in 4th with 22. 21. 18 Fortune 500 companies call Georgia home, including Home Depot, UPS, Delta Airlines, and Coca-Cola. Virginia hosts 24, led by defense contractors Northrop Grumman and General Dynamics. And these aren't regional players serving local markets, but companies that power the entire American economy and reach across the globe. Foreign automakers looked at America and made a decision that reveals everything about where economic advantage lies. When they built their flagship U.S. plants, they chose the South every single time. BMW's Spartanburg facility in South Carolina is the largest BMW plant anywhere on Earth, employing over 11,000 people with over $7 billion invested and vehicles exported to more than 120 countries. Toyota built its largest plant worldwide in Georgetown, Kentucky, with 8,000 plus employees. Mercedes-Benz has exported from Vance, Alabama to 135 countries since 1997. Boeing assembles the 787 Dreamliner in North Charleston, South Carolina, with around 6,000 workers on the line. $27 billion in annual economic impact flows from South Carolina's automotive sector alone, with the state ranking number 1 nationally in completed passenger vehicle exports and tire production. North Carolina employs 459,300 manufacturing workers. Georgia employs 426,500, and Tennessee puts 364,300 people to work in factories. Business-friendly policies, right-to-work laws, lower costs, and port access for exports drove these location decisions. The South won the manufacturing competition, and it wasn't even close. American energy independence runs through the South in ways that make every other region's contribution look marginal by comparison. 2.003 billion barrels of crude oil came out of Texas in 2024, shattering records and marking the first time any state has ever exceeded 2 billion barrels in a single year. Texas produces roughly 44% of all U.S. crude oil. Oklahoma adds 3%. Louisiana contributes 1%, and together, southern states produce about 45% of America's crude oil supply. Natural gas production follows the same pattern. 12.62 trillion cubic feet of natural gas came from Texas in 2024, another record that supports nearly 500,000 jobs in oil and gas while generating $27.3 billion in state and local taxes and royalties in fiscal year 2024 alone. Gulf Coast LNG export infrastructure makes America the world's largest exporter. Louisiana's 4 terminals handle 60% of U.S. LNG exports, while additional facilities in Texas pushed total American exports to 88.4 million metric tons in 2024, And that dominance isn't temporary, because more terminals are under construction right now. Renewable energy adds another dimension to Texas energy dominance. 42,300 megawatts of installed wind capacity generates 22% of state electricity, which would make Texas the fifth largest wind producer globally if you counted it as its own country. Solar capacity reached 25,400 megawatts in 2024, representing an 800% increase since 2019. The South produces America's energy, full stop. Tech and manufacturing capture headlines, but the South still dominates traditional industries that keep America fed and supplied with raw materials. 14.4 million bales of cotton came from American farms in 2024, with Texas leading national production and Georgia harvesting 2.1 million bales, valued at $987 million. Arkansas produced 101.6 million hundredweight of rice in 2024, representing roughly half of U.S. production, while Georgia grows approximately 50% of U.S. peanuts. 12.2 million head of cattle graze in Texas, generating an annual economic impact of $10.5 billion. Georgia ranks number 1 nationally in poultry, producing 1.4 billion broiler chickens worth $4.6 billion, which represents 16% of U.S. broiler production. Southern forests produce more than 50% of U.S. timber from just 40% of national timberland, generating $251 billion annually in economic impact. Georgia alone harvests more timber by volume than any other state, and none of these industries are relics of the past, but active contributors to current GDP. Running America without Southern agriculture turns out to be impossible. National security depends on the South in ways that rarely make headlines, but shape American military capabilities every single day. Naval Station Norfolk in Virginia is the world's largest naval station, home porting 75 ships and 134 aircraft with 82,000 plus active duty personnel and 29,000 plus civilian employees. Hampton Roads Department of Defense spending accounts for 45.6% of regional economic activity and generates $15 to $18 billion annually, making the military presence inseparable from the local economy. Fort Liberty in North Carolina, formerly Fort Bragg, holds the title of largest U.S. Army installation by population. 49,000 military personnel spread across 160,700 acres, and the base generates $8.1 billion in local economic impact annually, while North Carolina's total military economic impact reaches $66 billion per year. Texas military presence dwarfs every other state, with $114+ billion in economic activity supporting 622,000 plus jobs. Joint Base. San Antonio alone employs 82,639 people directly and supports 211,000 plus Texas jobs with $39 to $48.7 billion in statewide economic impact. $65.3 billion in direct defense spending flowed into Florida in 2022, representing 7.3% of state economy and supporting 865,937 jobs directly and indirectly. Major defense contractors headquartered in the South include Huntington Ingalls Industries in Newport News, Virginia, with $11.4 billion in defense revenue as the sole builder of U.S. Navy aircraft carriers, plus L3 Harris Technologies in Melbourne, Florida, with $15.6 billion in defense revenue. 41% of military recruits come from the South, despite the region having only 33% of the young adult population. American military readiness depends on Southern bases, Southern contractors, and Southern recruits in ways no other region can match. West Coast ports get attention, but Southern ports are taking over American trade. Port of Houston set records in 2024 with 4.14 million TEUs, shipping containers, and 53 million tons of cargo moving through the facility. Number 1 in U.S. foreign waterborne tonnage at 220.1 million short tons, and number 2 in foreign cargo value at $222.5 billion. Houston supports 1.54 million jobs in Texas and contributes $439 billion in state economic activity, which represents roughly 20% of Texas GDP. 5.6 million TEUs moved through Port of Savannah in 2024, representing 12.5% growth, with $4.5 billion in planned investments targeting 12.5 million TEU capacity by 2035. Port of Charleston offers the deepest water on the U.S. East Coast at 52 feet, handling 2.5 plus million TEUs annually, while supporting 187,000 plus jobs. East and Gulf Coast ports now handle 51.7% of U.S. TEU volumes as of 2025, up from 50.4% in 2024. The shift away from West Coast dependency is happening right now, driven by Panama Canal constraints, nearshoring to Mexico, and port infrastructure investments that southern states made years ahead of the curve. Migration patterns reveal economic truth better than any analysis. Americans and corporations vote with their feet, and both groups are choosing the South in numbers that keep accelerating. Nearly 1.8 million people moved into the South between 2023 and 2024, up 1.4%, and representing more than all other U.S. regions combined. The South accounted for 87% of national population growth in 2023, with Texas adding 562,941 residents and Florida adding 467,347. Dallas-Fort Worth led all metros in numeric growth, adding 152,598 residents from 2022 to 2023. Houston followed with 139,789. Miami brought in 123,000, and this wave shows no signs of slowing because the economic advantages keep compounding. Corporate headquarters followed the same path. 209 headquarters moves went to Texas between 2018 and 2024, more than any other state, with the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex ranking as the #1 destination for corporate headquarters relocations nationally after receiving 100 company announcements in that period. Fortune 500 net changes from 2018 to 2023 tell the story in stark terms. Texas gained +10 Fortune 500 headquarters. Florida gained +4. Georgia gained +3, while California lost 8, and 7 of those California losses went straight to Texas. Tesla moved from California to Austin in 2021. Oracle relocated from California to Austin in 2020. Caterpillar left Illinois for Dallas in 2022. Charles Schwab abandoned California for DFW in 2020. Hewlett-Packard Enterprise shifted from California to Houston in 2020. And these weren't sentimental decisions, but cold calculations based on business climate, tax advantages, no state income tax in Texas, Florida, and Tennessee, access to talent, and dramatically lower operating costs. 21%. That's the combined state and federal corporate rate in Texas because there's no state corporate income tax. North Carolina's corporate tax rate of 2.5% is the nation's lowest and disappears entirely by 2030, which means companies making location decisions today are planning for even better conditions tomorrow. Old economy manufacturing tells part of the story, but new economy tech hubs reveal where American innovation is heading. $4 billion in venture capital flowed into Austin in 2024, supporting a startup ecosystem of 4,500 plus companies with over 20 unicorns including Tesla, Bumble, and The Boring Company. Dell, Oracle, Samsung, Apple, Google, and Meta all employ thousands in Austin, making it a genuine tech center rather than a satellite office location. Research Triangle in North Carolina generated $178 billion GDP in 2022. 27% of state total, with 4.1% growth that made it the fourth fastest among 150 U.S. metros tracked. Research Triangle Park houses 375 plus companies employing 60,000 plus workers across life sciences, biotech, and semiconductors, creating a knowledge economy cluster that rivals anything on either coast. 120,000 plus tech jobs exist in Atlanta right now, supported by 60 plus accelerators and incubators with $3+ billion in projected venture capital funding by 2025. Georgia Tech produces 13,000 plus tech graduates annually, feeding local companies and startups. Intuit's $12 billion acquisition of MailChimp demonstrated Atlanta's startup potential and showed that exits at massive scale can happen outside traditional tech centers. Nashville achieved 51% tech job growth between 2015 and 2020, with 12% projected growth through 2025. Tennessee formed 73,000 new businesses in fiscal year 2024, representing a 60% increase since 2019, and the pipeline keeps filling with new ventures choosing Tennessee for its business climate and talent pool. American innovation isn't confined to one coast anymore, but spreading across the South in ways that will reshape where future companies start and scale. Florida's tourism industry deserves its own section because the numbers reach levels that make it a genuine economic pillar rather than a nice supplement. 143 million visitors came to Florida in 2024, generating $133.6 billion in economic impact. Out-of-state visitor spending reached $134.9 billion, up 3% from 2023, supporting 1.8 million jobs while generating $33.6 billion in tax revenue. $2,000. That's how much tourism activity saves Florida households annually in reduced tax burden, because visitor spending covers government services that would otherwise require higher taxes on residents. Central Florida, the Orlando region alone, contributed $94.5 billion in economic impact with 468,000 supported jobs. And tourism represents 7.8% of Florida's gross state product, making it a major economic pillar rather than a side business. Everything comes back to the opening premise. The American South produces nearly half of America's energy, operates the largest military installations, handles the majority of container trade growth, attracts most corporate relocations, and drives population growth exceeding all other regions combined. Virginia's founders laid the constitutional foundations 250 years ago, and today's semiconductor fabs and LNG terminals continue that pattern of Southern contributions that prove essential to American prosperity and security. What's changed is that the South no longer functions as one contributor among many, but operates as the dominant economic force in the nation. Business-friendly tax policies, right-to-work laws, abundant energy resources, strategic port infrastructure, and military investment have created a self-reinforcing cycle of growth. Texas alone now produces more crude oil than the next 5 states combined. Southern ports capture increasing market share from West Coast competitors, and the region's economic gravity keeps strengthening. Whether America needs the South isn't really a question anymore. The evidence makes it clear that America depends on the South for energy security, military readiness, manufacturing capacity, agricultural production, and increasingly for economic growth and innovation that will define the next several decades. The South isn't rising again because it already rose. Understanding that reality matters for anyone trying to understand where America is heading in the 21st century.